Welcome back to another episode of In the Garden. This is part 15 of that series, where we are going to continue to explore not only what happened in the Garden of Great Joy, Gan Eden, but also how that applies to our immediate future, where in just 8.5 years, God is going to restore the entire earth, ridding it all of all traces of religion and politics and militarism and patriotism and conspiracy and all of those kinds of things, and going to replace all of the destruction that mankind has perpetrated on this planet, restore it all and turn it back into the Garden of Eden. And this is a home for the mortal remnant of Yisrael, who will have survived the upcoming 7 years of the time of Israel's troubles. And so we are explaining what transpired there to understand where we're going, but also to have a better understanding of what went right and what went wrong. And we're just now dealing with Yahweh's edict and sentencing regarding the serpent, who is Satan. He is even referred to as the adversary in this discussion, in the opening text that I'm going to read to you. What was the consequence of him deliberately misquoting Yahweh's testimony? And understand, the difference between Satan's rendering of what God actually said and what he conveyed to Towrah is very small. And the difference between what God actually said and what appears in the Christian New Testament is very big. The difference between what God actually said and appears in the Quran is cataclysmically big. And there's also a very substantial difference between what God said and what appears in the Talmud, particularly in the Babylonian Talmud, as rabbis are arguing with each other. And so if Satan received this condemnation for his really small alteration of God's testimony to mislead Towrah, what do you think is the consequence that God is going to choose as recompense for the authors of the Christian New Testament, Babylonian Talmud, and of course the Quran, as well as those who have promoted those tomes? Something to think about as you listen to these words. It begins hostility and animosity, an adversarial influence. Satan is the adversary. I will constitute and establish between you, this is Satan, Satan, and between the woman, saying that Satan's primary ploy as he tries to influence humankind is with woman. And the reason that is so, God explains later in this same text, where he differentiates women from men and saying that women will have this overwhelming pining for their men and will be driven more by emotion than will men. And it's largely true, although it's a generality. There's some very rational women out there, and there are some really emotional men out there. In fact, we're entering a period where I think most women are acting like men and most men are acting like women. But nonetheless, this is the way that civilization has been for the millennia. And so God is just saying that he's going to attack humankind through woman. And between that which you sow, the seeds that Satan has sowed, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, progressive socialist communist politics, these are all seeds of Satan. And her offspring, which would be the people of the world, souls, those particularly who are derived from this first woman with an Asama conscience. It says, he shall crush your head. Now, Zerah was the word used for offspring here. Zerah is the operative verbal actionable root of Zeroah, of which there were three. Moshe, Dod, and Yada. And it is indicating here that one of those three, or all three of them, at different times, will crush the very brains, the leadership, this very source and beginning of Satan's influence. Now, when you consider what Moshe said and did, and when you consider what Dod said and did, and what I have written and said, even though Dod and Moshe are the two most prolific writers in God's story, up to this point, I have written more than both of them combined. And in this particular area, alternative of crushing Satan at the source and cutting down those he used to lead people astray, I have done probably 1,000 times, maybe 1,000,000 times more than Moshe and Dod combined. And that is because God asked me to begin by writing a criticism of Satan's most overt tome, the Quran. And I have the 5 volumes of that to show as evidence for it, called Goddamn Religion. It is the most irrefutable and comprehensive presentation of Islam's beginning and the Quran and Hadith as spoken by Allah and Muhammad ever written. And then to do it again by writing a 5-volume set disproving Christianity, which is also essential in a different way to the salvation of God's people. They must understand the enemy of Islam that declared war on them some 1,400 years ago to survive to Dod's return. And they must come to understand the nature of Christianity to be able to perceive Dod as the Messiah, Son of God, Savior and returning King, because Christianity piled all of its lies right on top of the truth, and they have precluded Jews for centuries from recognizing this most profound truth. And of course, the founder of Rabbinic Judaism, Rabbi Akiba, did them no favors when he foisted a false Messiah on top of a false Messiah and led people further away from the truth rather than just uncovering the lie by presenting Mizmor 22, 88, and 89 to refute Christianity. So in this particular case, the one who has been given the primary task of crushing Satan's origins, who has written the book where Satan admits that he was there in Eden and that he did these very things, and the book that also takes him back to Eden as Satan in the Quran and in the book of Ezekiel, besting Satan at every possible avenue and thwarting Satan's ambitions now to make certain that there is a remnant of Yisrael who is not only part of the Shabuah and Towrah harvest, but is there as a mortal remnant prepared for Yahweh's return on Kippurim, is Yada. And then speaking to Satan, he says, and you shall press down upon his heel. This means that Satan's primary point of attack is going to be Yisrael. How do I know that? Because Jacob is the father of Yisrael. Jacob's name is based upon Akab, heel. And so it is the stance that Yahweh took with the descendants of Jacob that has to be thwarted for Satan to prevail and be perceived as the God of Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, and as the primary influence behind the brainless political platitude cult of libertard progressives. And so that is where he is attacking. And the reason for that is quite simple. Yahweh is coming back for his people. The promise of Shabuah and Towrah and Yom Kippurim and Sukkah is about a reunion with Yisrael and a restoration of the relationship with Yisrael. And if Satan was successful and precluded Yisrael from being reacquainted with Yahweh's name, which was the condition that was universal prior to our collaborative effort beginning 23 years ago. If they were unaware of what the real Messiah and Son of God, their Savior and King, Dowd, had accomplished with Yahowah, which was universal among all Jews until a matter of 2 or 3 years ago. And again, it's the collaboration I have with Yahowah that brought this out. If they were unaware of the impending time of the beginning of the time of Israel's troubles and what was going to occur then, and then what would occur 7 years later with Yahweh's return on Yom Kippurim, and they were not prepared for that meeting, then Yahweh would not return to the earth, and he would have no purpose other than to destroy it. So there's a lot at stake here with Hasatan going at Yisrael. Therefore, if you're going to be assigned the responsibility of awakening God's people, harvesting them, and protecting them, you have to go directly at Satan and smash him right in the brains. Smash him right from the beginning to the end. And that's why we began by exposing and condemning Islam, then Christianity and Judaism, and now progressive Muslim alliances around the world, because this is necessary if there's going to be a remnant of Yisrael, particularly one that can see the truth and act upon it. So Satan's reputation as Hasatan, the adversary, was imposed by Yahweh. That was the first word in this particular statement. And it is the most debilitating of all penalties, because it's the one thing that Satan wanted the most, is to be perceived as God's equal or even as the superior to God. And now he is denounced as nothing but an adversarial irritant. The one who changes Yahweh's testimony to mislead. In other words, the inspiration behind the Christian New Testament, the Talmud, and the Quran. And it is the one thing that Satan must overcome to prevail, because he does not want to be known as the adversary, but instead as God, the Lord. And it is why you will find repetitive criticisms of Satan in the religions which feature the Lord as God. He must repudiate that title to be perceived as if he were a god. This is actually Satan attempting to rebuke the adversary title that he now disdains. Yahweh conveyed this essential message to us using Bayan, as I shared in our last program. Those willing to carefully consider God's teaching regarding Hasatan, the adversary, can make the proper connections to understand his ambition and approach, and come to understand his role in religion. This is made most adroitly available to us in the book that is the textbook on identifying the choder, responding to the choder, and of teaching the choder how to respond at this time, Isaiah, where he devotes not only a full chapter to the choder, but also a full chapter to the choder's principal adversary, Hasatan, one in the 14th chapter, the other in the 11th. Now, spirits cannot reproduce, so Satan does not have offspring in the sense of sons and daughters. However, just as it is desirable to be born into Yahweh's covenant family via Pesach, Matzah, and Bakurim, it is possible to be the spawn of Hasatan by doing what Hasatan has done, misappropriated and misconstruing Yahweh's testimony. The result is to be either demon-possessed or at least satanically influenced. When a mortal soul leagues with religious spirits, it is imprinted, becoming immortal, just like Hasatan, as well as immoral, thereby earning the same eternal punishment. And understand, there are relatively few people that are punished by God. The vast majority of human souls simply cease to exist upon the mortal demise of that individual. But if you have done what Satan has done, if you have misappropriated, misconstrued, miscited Yahweh's name, his reputation, or his testimony, or you have advanced and partnered with those who have, or you just haven't engaged and followed Yahweh's instructions to denounce them and rid the world of them, then you would be guilty of this and could find yourself going from that place of your soul simply dissipating into nothingness to the eternal punishment of incarceration in Sheol as a recompense. One way to distinguish these people and thus avoid them is that men and women who conspire with Satan typically deploy the same tactic as the adversary, the same tactic he used here, because Hasatan, as a variation of a malach, a spiritual implement, as a cherub, has no creativity. And so what they do is they create religions like Judaism, Christianity, and Islam by twisting and counterfeiting God's testimony, bastardizing it, corrupting it. And it is presented errantly, cited, out of context, then perverted to suggest the opposite of its implication. When I wrote the books of Goddamn Religion and Twistianity and Babel, what I did is I put those texts next to what God actually said, and you can see how just horribly they're misconstrued and taken out of context to imply the opposite of what God really said. And that was really what occurred in the garden as well. It is the one trick that Hasatan has, because he has no credibility apart from the Torah, prophets, and Psalms. Christianity has no credibility apart from it. Judaism has no credibility apart from it. Islam has no credibility apart from it. And they all do the same thing. They take it out of context, misconstrue it, misquote it, misappropriate it to create the opposite intent that the statement actually presents in the proper context when cited correctly. All three. Exactly the same thing, including Satan's approach in the garden. Humankind has a propensity, as this prophecy foretells, to have been crushed, bruised, and pressed down while subjugated by an unholy marriage of cleric and king using half-truths, straw men, corruptions, and counterfeits. With religion, there were many of, in fact, most religions present Satan as a god. They exist so that the few can control the many. And some are deadly, as is the case with the death cult of Islam, serving Satan in every possible way, because the enemy of Muslims are Jews. This very idea that Satan would go after Jacob and the descendants of Jacob. Islam exists to annihilate Jews. The seed of woman, who pushes the serpent and his minions down, who crushes them at their source, is primarily Yada. I've done more of this than anybody by a huge degree. Of course, that foundation for this was laid by Moshe, and the covenant then was brought into existence through Dode, and it was his Mizmor that explained the covenant and the Torah to us so that we can capitalize upon them. So God certainly set the foundation for it, and then he, through his prophets, revealed everything we needed to know to make this case. But the job of making it and bringing Satan down, preventing him from accomplishing his goal, has been allocated to the role that, as Yahweh's final Zeroah, based on Zerah, that I have been asked to play. Therefore, Hasatan has used religion to batter Jacob, and therefore Israel's stance, his footsteps, his movement, seeking to circumvent Jews from recognizing Yahweh in time to participate in these harvests and in Yom Kippurim. Well, life would go on, but it would be more challenging and it would be different. To the woman, God said, I will substantially increase. Rabba, Rabba. I will in magnitude, quantity, and time multiply. Your labor, your discomfort, and strenuous effort with your childbearing, with your pregnancy and period of gestation, giving birth, with challenging physical sensations and hard work, you shall bear children. And toward your man, you will have strong emotional feelings. You will have an abundant and an overflowing sense of desire, whether it's sexual longings, urges, even the inclination to want to do many things. In addition, he will provide wisdom, sharing narratives with symbolic meaning, which with you, such that he will be more influential than you. Hu mashal ha'ata. He will be responsible for educating you, and he will use concise language, vivid examples, pithy quotes, and he will rule with you. He will speak of himself in comparison to you. The call stem reveals that this will actually occur in the relationship, while the imperfect conjugation tells us that the condition will be ongoing. This is Bereshith in the beginning, Genesis 3:16. But rather than putting John 3:16 on billboards, people would have been better off putting Bereshith 3:16 on billboards. This is a far more overt statement of the relationship between men and women going forward from this time than has ever been written. And it addresses why very often we speak different languages, men from the head, women from the heart. As consequences go, this one would be mostly beneficial and, of course, completely fair. Chawah's ill-informed and irrational decision, combined with her egotistical desires and her lack of self-control, had censured life and removed Yahweh's protection, putting them at risk. Therefore, to remedy these issues, Yahweh would give Chawah the responsibility for restoring what she had truncated and harmed. Women made in God's image with a neshama conscience would bear and raise children, but without Yahweh's help, it would not be easy, nor always enjoyable, but life would go on and be sustained. Not only is childbirth the most rewarding and the most painful experience for women, but there is also the once-a-month period of messy discomfort and emotional upheaval, which makes it possible. Then, while actually giving birth would be exceedingly uncomfortable for some hours, this time would pale in comparison to the ongoing effort required to raise children from there. You think that a unborn child is a nuisance and, a big pregnant belly, and women say, well, I can't wait to bear this child. I want to tell you, they become infinitely more challenging when they're handed to you and say, now, deal with this. But there would be a silver lining. Relatively brief periods of pain would be overwhelmingly offset by the greatest joy life has to offer, being a mother. Having witnessed it and having listened to women speak of the ordeal and aftermath, even as a man, I understand that the pain is forgotten. The newborn child is laid upon the woman's breast, then in reality, that is when the difficulties are just beginning. Giving birth and then raising a child gives a woman a wonderful sense of fulfillment and satisfaction, as well as considerable aggravation. And while it would take tremendous effort, life's ultimate blessing would be born in travail, and for most, it remains in travail. I live on an island here with a culture that unfortunately is exceedingly abusive. Men very often father children, but never, very seldom, participate in their lives. And they then strike and physically abuse the women that they impregnated. And they make demands on them, contributing very little, if anything, to their lives. And the women, having been abused by their mothers and having witnessed the abuse that their mothers endured by their fathers, very often, in the majority of cases here, strike their children. And we've heard the cases over and over and over again. In fact, we've heard of very few exceptions where boys and girls have been badly abused, physically abused by their mothers. And so this is far more common than you might think. You know, in the world of Islam, little girls have their genitals mutilated by their mothers. They are forced to walk around in tents by their fathers. And if even if they are harmed by a man, the fathers will beat them to death. It's a rough world out there, even today, especially today. Teshukah is an emotional term that was applied to Chawa, to woman, with a very interesting twist, one fitting the crime that Chawa committed. Chawa clearly lusted for what she felt the forbidden fruit would offer. She coveted the wrong thing, and she was driven by her desires. She had been conceived to be with and to support Adam, but her inclination was to circumvent the man and to be like God. She not only forfeited her role in the relationship, but she also damaged his as well. Rather than help, she had become a hindrance. Yahweh's response, of course, was perfect. He directed Chawa's emotions and feelings right back to Adam. She would want him. She would need him. She would be inclined to do many things with and for him that she had forfeited up to this point. You know, today I've shared with many, but I'm blessed. My wife, Leah, is the living embodiment of Teshukah toward me. And I exude mashal, a word that we will examine momentarily, with her. It is as if Yahweh gave Leah to me and me to her to be a model for this paradigm. She is thoughtful and brilliant, a student of the Torah and a contributor to the covenant, and yet I am her teacher. And I am hopelessly romantic and more affectionate than most men, but in this aspect of our lives, I have admitted many times I am her canvas. And she's giggling because she knows it. Mashal speaks of using word pictures and easily understood examples to elucidate the most intriguing aspects of complex familial relationships. Man would speak to woman in terms that she could understand. This was the role role defining in their relationship. It's not a pejorative. While not comparable to his Mizmor songs or Moshe's Torah, Dode's Mashal proverbs contribute enormously to our understanding of how to grow and thrive as a family. Now, the religious are wont to render Hu, Mashal, Ba'ata as he will rule over you. And yet the primary meaning of Mashal is to cite a proverb using words to draw pictures, to share succinct and witty quotes, to liken one thing to another, to make connections, to enhance understanding. Its secondary meaning then is derived from the way words are wielded when wielded wisely, which gives those who convey them with aplomb the ability to govern effectively. They are put in charge because of their ability to reason and communicate appropriately. It's why Yahweh appointed King Dode. Man was not being authorized to wield his superior strength over women, ruling over them with the force of arms. No. he was being appointed with a responsibility to speak rationally and intelligently to her and to influence her thinking. Now, it's possible, even probable, that Adam did an inadequate job of explaining the instructions he had been given regarding the tree of knowledge, such that Chawah did not fully appreciate the consequence of her actions. Also, Yahweh may have remained closer to Adam because he would have been driven by reason, while the woman would have been more emotionally inclined based upon this assessment. And yet, since they are both essential elements of a loving and productive relationship, head and heart, they would not be complete without one another. As I've shared before, Dode was cerebral and emotional, and he remains God's favorite child. So much of this, while curious speculation, helps us fit the pieces of God's puzzle together for a clearer picture. If I may point out a bit of religion's malfeasance, not only is mashal rendered inadequately and misleadingly as rule in most English translations, ba actually means with, not over. If God wanted to say over, he would have used al. Ruled over you, al, not ba. Ba means with. This means that even in the governance aspects mashal that apply to men must be rendered in conjunction with women, not against females. Over, as I've said, is all in Hebrew, but bal conveys the idea of proximity and should have been translated in, with, through, or by, even among. Therefore, the primary meaning, as you have just learned of mashal, is not rule, govern, control, or dominion, or even have one's way with, but instead to convey a message using a comparison which leads to understanding. You can't get to the Christian or Jewish interpretation by accurately rendering the words, which is why they changed them. While it is not all of these words convey, it is nevertheless true that for most women, and when we examine human history, it's also true that men have ruled with women. King and queen of castle and home, the father and mother of a family. The first couple took matters into their own hands by eating from the tree of knowledge, and they took over their own lives, and so it would be. For better or worse, men and women would rule the world. But it was the perfect sentence for this particular crime. To whatever degree Chawah had influenced Adam, causing him to acquiesce his authority and responsibility, control from this point on would be shared. They would henceforth influence and sometimes corrupt one another. However, when we rely on the primary connotation of mashal and consider it in juxtaposition to tashnukwa, then the picture is of reason complementing emotion. Chawah reacted emotionally to Satan and failed to exercise good judgment. According to God, women would continue to be influenced by their feelings, so much so that women and emotion would become mashal, a proverb, a similitude, a metaphor, and a parable which likens one thing to another. While it is an oversimplification, and there are many exceptions to the rule, generally women are not only more emotional than most men, but their decisions are also more often flavored by feelings over reason. While pondering the implications of the relative value of tashuka being influenced by emotional feelings and mashal being guided by effective communication, I've come to appreciate the merit of each. One without the other has limited value. Relationships work and they thrive when our thoughts and our feelings are both expressed and enjoyed. Personally, I prefer it when reasoned words lead us to an appropriate emotional response. Yahweh does too, which is why Adam came before Chawah and instruction preceded defiance. It is why Yah loved Dod, the lyricist of Yisrael, most of all. Now, as we shall soon see, what was good for the goose was good for the gander. Ish abon, translated your labor, discomfort, and strenuous work, does not, as most English translations imply, address labor pains. We know this because Adam will receive the same consequence. Therefore, Yahweh is not trying to torment women with childbirth, but instead is inferring that conceiving and raising children will be tumultuous. It is going to be life's greatest undertaking in terms of both being taxing and exhilarating, all combined together and genuinely being a lot of work. Among these lines, it is also interesting to note that there are three equally viable ways to vocalize esteb. Translated here as challenging physical sensations and hard work. Esteb depicts a difficult and challenging endeavor which requires considerable effort. Now, those who have listened to these programs up to this point, those who have read the 30 some odd books that I have written behind me, know that it is my propensity to examine the words that God chose, not only in the translation itself, which I've pointed out has bold text for the primary meaning of the word itself in its most generic form, so that you can look it up in a variety of different search engines and never stop at just one. I have those who have a propensity to think that Strong's is the end all of definitions, but Strong's gets many, many things wrong. It is just a starting point for you to understand the meaning of words. And even beyond that, as I had to clarify a comment on one of my more recent programs using Isha, that they said, Isha, the fire and feminine fire, and Isha, woman, are different words. And they gave, different Strong's numbers to say it. Take away the diacritical markings, and both words are identically written with the same letters in the Hebrew text. So you do have to pay attention in this process. So I'm giving you the tools to do the job, but if you're going to do the job right in terms of validating these translations. Ein Tazde Bayeth can be vowel pointed astab, meaning worker or labor, as istab, the Hebrew word, can mean the physical sensation, pain, and trouble, difficulty of hard work. However, the same vocalization can be rendered vessel or container, and as osteb, the term communicates the concept of idol worship and that of an image which evokes devotion, as well as suffering, anguish, and an offensive state which is unfavorable. So this is the challenge of producing a reliable and credible translation, is looking at all of the words that share the same letters in the original document prior to the diacritical markings that were added, in this case, thousands of years after the text was written, so that you can determine what is the best fit for this particular sentence. And if there are many choices, I will typically do as we're doing here. I will explain what they are so that you know what the palette was to choose from. And then I will explain to you why I chose some and not others, so that these translations are unlike anything else with the attentive commentary, so that it puts you in the position where you can read them and make decisions on your own. I've said so many times, and of course it's always taken out of context now, don't trust my translations. What you should do is validate them. And if you validate my translations, if you examine the words that actually provide the text of Yahweh's testimony, and you examine them under many lexicons, and you do what I've done. You go back to the Dead Sea Scrolls if there is a difference between the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Masoretic text, and then you strip the words of their diacritical markings so that you can examine all the words that would fit that particular rendering, and then you view it all from the perspective of Yahweh, who is always consistent. Then you can validate everything that I have said, and you will come to trust my translations, as everyone who has gone through this exercise has determined over the years. Benim, which is the plural of the word for son and child, which is Ben. It's often written just Beni, B-E-N-Y. A lot of words in Hebrew will remove a letter in the normal communication of it. So it's presented mostly Beni Yisrael, for example, the sons or the children of Yisrael. It is derived from Bana. Bana means builder, the one who restores a family, establishes a home. The one thing about Bana is that it means to build and to rebuild, to establish a firm basis and restore, to favor prosperity and abundance. As such, Benim, or Beni, speaks of the establishing of the covenant, which is a familial relationship agreement, and a home, a household, and of restoring it. The seed of woman would do these very things. In the Hebrew mindset, there is much more to Ben than son, at least compared to the way it is understood today. Then sons came in their father's name. You were always a name, and then you would convey your father's name. So, it would have been name Ben, for example, Yosha. It's Yosha ben Nun. He was Yosha, the son of Nun. That was Moshe's successor. So the son's name, Ben, the father's name. We even see this as still in names like Osama bin Laden. Osama, son of Laden. Sons were most often about their father's business. They were to represent their father with respect to Yahweh, though David was all of these things. Now, turning to the third culprit, Yahweh judged him fairly too. God explained the cause and consequence for Adam, telling these things, recording these things for our benefit. This reads, "To Adam, he said, because you have listened to the voice of your woman, and you have eaten from the tree, which for the benefit of the relationship and to get the most joy out of life, Asher, I instructed you, saying, do not make a habit of eating from it. Has the earth, so because I've said this to you, the earth has been cursed and has become annoying in this way because of you." So I sort of tripped over the end of that. I apologize, but the message is, Adam, I asked you to listen to me. I communicated using my kol voice, something, by the way, that Israel has not heard in 3,400 years, because they told Yahweh, we don't want to listen to you or see you again, very early on in the Exodus. But they will hear Yah's voice again come to Towrah. Because you have not listened, Shama. Now, God says all the time, listen to me. And instead, the religious, particularly Jews, yabber to God instead in their prayers, not listening to him. Because you have listened instead to the voice of your woman, the Isha, and have eaten from the tree. Because you've done these things, which for the benefit of the relationship, I told you, do not make a habit of eating from it. The earth has been cursed and has become annoying. Arar has been inflicted, injured, and harmed, and will be vexing and infuriating. In other words, this perfect garden that I created to you for everything to respond and to be nurturing for you, you've turned it into a mess. It's going to respond to you as you responded to me. In this way, because of you, because of what you did. If you don't listen to Yahowah, even now, bad things happen. Look at the world around us, where virtually no one is listening to Yahowah. You will labor, engaging in strenuous work. It's a bone. To eat of it, a kalki. All the days of your life. Bereshith, Genesis 13:17. Now, based upon the events which have been depicted and the juxtaposition of mashal and taushka, which are reasoned words in comparison to emotional feelings, we can surmise that listening to our fellow man or woman, in this case, rather than to God, comes at a price. In the struggle between head and heart, the order of things remains important. To avoid the catastrophic ramifications of misguided responses, we must ponder the implications it may have on our and other relationships with God. While it is a small thing among much larger issues, Yahowah was not telling men that they shouldn't listen to their wives. We know this because later in Bereshith, this very book, God will tell Abraham to act upon Sarah's advice regarding the removal of Ishmael and Hagar. Since he is not capricious when it comes to his family, the feminine perspective has merit. In Yahowah's case, however, Towrah listened to Hasatan rather than to Yahowah. Even worse, she felt at liberty to amend God's instructions when then adding insult to injury, considering the errant source of inspiration, it was as if Adam were listening to the likes of rabbis arguing in the Talmud, New Testament, or Quran. Any decision based upon such rubbish would surely soil his soul. This, by the way, if he's still in Cambridge range, is Wookie, who likes to contribute to these programs from time to time. Therefore, this referendum, this is a referendum on whom we can trust and why. The Torah or the demonically inspired religious scriptures which contradict it. So as always, God trumps man and reason trumps emotion and faith. That is the message here. Asher was inserted here, and it's one of my favorite Hebrew words, as many of you know. It's actually why I'm here sharing this message on your behalf, tilling the ground for the seeds of truth. It was the first word I sought to translate 23 years ago, all because it was misrepresented in every English rendition of the prophecy recorded in Shamuel, listen to him, 2 Samuel 7. I've actually listened to him about God. Asher is so much more than a relative pronoun. As a verb, it speaks of advancing and progressing in a relationship by way of walking in a straightforward path, of being led along it in the right way so as to be blessed and to be happy with the result. It is to prioritize positive aspects of a relationship by encouraging others to consider the potential benefits. Asher, therefore, is to guide someone in the way to live an upright life by moving in the proper direction such that they derive the greatest meaning from their existence. As a noun, Asher projects being happy, joyous, and blessed as a result of one's steps and strides in life. This cheerful state is achieved by walking along the certain and correct path to be secure and free from harm. And as a proper noun, Asher was Jacob's son and the father of the tribe. that bears his name. Therefore, Yahweh's Shawah, his instructions, were offered such that Adam would, Asher, be properly guided in the relationship to get the most out of life, even in his fallen state. Once again, we're reminded that a call, here used again, means eat, and it was addressed in the imperfect, which means that Adam was not asked to make a habit of eating from this tree. If he had taken a bite, set it down, stopped consuming it, he would no longer have been in violation of the instruction. That's the advantage of it having been written in this mood, in the imperfect. Not mood, but conjugation. The first time we encountered Ha-Adamah, the earth, which is stated here, I explained that it was the feminine form of Ha-Adam, the man. That distinction seems particularly apropos here because Adam's poor decision is reversing course. The man who came from the Adamah is returning to it, partly as a result of his companion's influence. And Adamah would therefore mean the man of the earth. Adam is based also on a word that means red, kind of a bloody red. So it's a bloody man, red man of the earth. It is the title Adamah Parah that we read later of the red heifer. So it's a bloody red man of the earth who is productive and fruitful. We would do well to explore Yahweh's intent with Arar, which was rendered as cursed. It suggests that Adam's response made the entire experience with man vexing and infuriating for God, in addition to being harmful to the relationship. It is seldom noted, mostly as a result of misleading translations, but Adam and Chawah would endure the very same consequence. Ishabon was applied to both. Life would now be challenging, remaining so even through this day. The work required is more strenuous and physically taxing. Mind you, since we are told that at the outset that Adam was placed in the garden to observe it and to work in it, productive labor has its rewards and is the furthest thing from a punishment. But it becomes more challenging the more we are apart from God and not listening to him. The lone distinction was the energy required to achieve the desired results. It would be supplied by Adam without assistance now from God. And he had chosen this to be out on his own. And in this light, he would be under Yahweh's, when he was under Yahweh's protective care, Yahweh provided a wide array of wonderful things for him to consume. And now that Adam was on his own, he would have to feed himself and provide for Chawah and for her offspring if they were to survive. That said, it was a reasonable consequence. Work is beneficial. Our efforts are rewarded when we seek to nurture and feed ourselves and others. And when we till the fertile ground of Yahweh's guidance, we grow and grow exponentially. We become productive, fruitful. We feel better about ourselves and develop character when we strive for what we achieve. Now, it's the whole concept of what I've done these past 23 years with Yahweh. We've worked at it. Now I can have a sense of accomplishment because for 23 years, 10, 12, 14 hours a day, I have devoted myself to understanding the word of Yahweh as he conveyed them to us. And I've been able, with active thinking, disciplined procedures, to come to understand what his message means to our lives and how we apply it and capitalize on what he is offering and expects in return. That is a testament behind me to 23 years of very diligent work in this regard. It is why now I can deliver this program to you as part of the YAHOWAH blog. So life's greatest achievements are produced when we work with Yahowah. Therefore, Adam's initial job was, it reads, thorn bushes, detestable and loathsome, non-fruit-bearing vegetation, and abhorrent, disgusting and irritating plants, twisted and splinter-like, and thistles, prickly plants that are of no value and are used to goad, to control. It's going to produce, speaking of the Adamah, as you approach and consume these plants of the open environs. Barashith in the beginning, Genesis 3:18. Well, we're going to continue this in our next program, but our biggest challenge now, my single biggest challenge, collaborating with Yahowah at this time to reintroduce God to his people and to make them aware of who he is and what he's offering, what he's expecting of them now, and when all of these future events will transpire, is I have to remove the thorn bushes and the thistles. That's why we started by exposing and condemning the thorniest of them, Islam. It is why we then went to the goad that Paul claimed was in his side that Satan used to control him. It is why the thistles and the prickly plants that are manifest by rabbis in Judaism had to be exposed and pulled from the garden. For the harvest to be productive, the weeds must be tilled. It is the job that we have been assigned. It is why I spend so much time refuting false religious claims. Because without the reeds having been pulled away, the desirable plants don't get enough life. They don't get enough substance from the soil. They're not allowed to grow. They cannot even be harvested because they're too corrupted with all of the wasteful things that are harmful to us. So now you know precisely why God made these statements and what we have had to do to comply with them. So I thank you for listening. I look forward to being with you on this next program. When next we see one another, it will be this evening, starting at 6 o'clock this evening, East Coast time, when we bring to you Family Hour. And our intent during Family Hour is to produce the next episode of the Shavua Harvest, picking up where we left off earlier this morning. I thank you for listening and for inviting me into your homes and into your lives to share Yahowah's message with you. I am Craig Winn, and this has been the Yahowah Blog.